As I work with thousands of people over the course of my career, one of the things you realize is that as people struggle with emotional issues, a really foundational issue comes to the surface. It really has to do with a sense of, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Who am I in this world? What's my relevance in the world? And the way I would say it is this, I have a bunch of different quotes all over my walls in the office, and the things that I try to let guide me and guide the people I work with. So I pulled some of those down, and I'm just going to read some of them to you. I think they're very relevant to this. So my first one I start with is one that says, our life purpose is not fixed. It evolves to the degree that we optimally grow through the combination of gifts and challenges of our life. And that's a really good way to see it. It is not that I have a singular life purpose, but it's what can I do with what I was given. When we come into this world, we're given both gifts and challenges. Okay, I've got gifts and challenges within myself physically. I may be physically attractive. I may be intelligent. I may have particular talents. I also have, and on the other hand, I could be unattractive. I could have some intellectual deficits. I could be physically impaired in some ways. We have both gifts, which are those things we think of as being something pleasant and positive. We have challenges. And both of those play a really significant role in shaping our lives. Also, environmentally, we have the same thing. I may be born into a circumstance where my parents have resources, they are loving and psychologically attuned people who support me in what I pursue. Or I may have a situation where we have very limited resources, parents are overwhelmed, they have their own problems, I have a lot of deficits, or I go into a school situation where I'm bullied. All of these things are what shape us, and the key thing is these are all important factors. In fact, a lot of the time it's the challenges that really help us to become who we are and become the best versions of ourselves. And so today I'm going to talk about a particular example to kind of illustrate this. It's not just to say this is just true for this woman, but this is true for all of us. And so when you hear this story, one, I hope that you feel inspired by it, but also I want you to think about yourself and begin to translate this into your own life experiences and how this relates to you. And so our story that we're talking about today is the story of the miracle worker. Now, this was a really popular movie and play for a lot of years, and anybody who's much of a theater attender has seen it. The Huntsville theater companies have done this show probably 3 different times in the last decade. So hopefully it's something that you've seen. If not, I really recommend that you see it. It is an incredibly inspiring and incredibly insightful story. It tells the story of Helen Keller. Now, the way I say it in simple terms is this, that if Helen Keller had not had spinal meningitis at 19 months old, she would have been an inconsequential debutante from Tuscumbia, Alabama, who would have lived and died and never said or done anything of significance. But instead what happened was this, is that she developed spinal meningitis at 19 months old. At that point, she became deaf and blind from it, which is, of course, a horrible and traumatic event for her and for her family. This beautiful little young girl they had so many hopes for, and here she was just a mess. Now, you want to see this in a broader context of what were the circumstances, and this is such a good example of both gifts and challenges. The Kellers were a particularly privileged family. This was kind of Southern aristocracy. Captain Keller was actually the governor of North Alabama post-Civil War. So he had a very important appointed position. He was the publisher of the North Alabamian newspaper. So this is a really impressive guy, a powerful, influential family. But they were just traumatized by this experience with Helen. They didn't know what to do with her. And so what we saw was that over the years that followed, Helen deteriorated. Okay, the family didn't know what to do with her. She became just like a really untrained animal. She would grab things off the table and eat them. She would grunt. She would throw things. She was just an awful mess. So this is the problem that's growing and growing in their lives. And in fact, the Kellers were beginning to think that perhaps they would just have to have her put in an institution, which back in that era, an institution meant going to hell. Okay, basically, institution meant a horrible place where children were molested and rats chewed on your toes at night, and there were disease-ridden places. These were horrible places to go, but they were at a loss. They didn't know what to do for her. So as a last-ditch effort, they contacted a school that worked with teachers, particularly that worked with the blind and deaf. Now we want to switch over to another story. The other story is the story of Annie Sullivan. Okay? Annie Sullivan actually grew up in an institution. She and her brother were orphans. Her brother was younger than her. She was deaf growing up, or at least partially deaf. she grew up in these horrible circumstances. She grew up with memories of her dear sweet little brother crying out to her at night for her to help him, and his feeling very sad and lost and miserable. And these memories echoed in her ears. Eventually her brother did die, so very, very tragic outcome there. She eventually found her way to an institution which was related to this school. They actually got her some surgery that allowed her to regain a functional amount of hearing, and she got an education through them about how to essentially be a nanny. She carried impacts from these experiences she grew up with. Okay? On one hand, she was tenacious, she was hardworking, she was resourceful, she was insightful. So these were all things that actually came from the challenges of her circumstances. She had to rise to that. But one of the quotes that I didn't bring in here with me was one that says, "Our greatest strengths and our greatest weaknesses are often born of our greatest wounds." And so on the other side, what we had for Annie Sullivan was she was a stubborn, contentious, argumentative individual. And so when it came time for her to graduate and this school sent her off to go to try to help out the Kellers, what they said to her was, don't come back. We don't want you. We're done with you. So this is this 20-year-old girl who's had this traumatic childhood her whole life. She is going out in the world and she's going to this one place, a place that she's never been to before. She's got to go down south into Alabama. She is obviously fearful of this situation. 20 years old. This is a kid. Okay, and she goes into this situation with this powerful Captain Keller and this whole aristocratic family, and she tries to begin to intervene and work with this situation, but she's working with these people who are just sabotaging everything that she does. They're overly tolerant with Helen, they put up with too much out of her, and Helen is getting worse and worse as we go. And so at a certain point, as we see other things going on, for instance, that Captain Keller is a very dominant individual, and so Helen's brother is very cowed by him and very weak and fearful and anxious. Captain Keller's wife is very fearful of him and so on. So this is a very damaged family. As things get better, Helen is behaving better. Annie has really, really worked hard and done it better, but she, in her own stubborn and committed way, she is unwilling to let people be less than what they have potential to be, optimizing your life's purpose. She was all about that, having come from where she came from. And so at 20 years old, she stood up to Captain Keller, and she insisted that she be allowed to take Annie to the guest house behind the house, and that Annie would, that Annie would be able to take Helen to the guest house, and that they would have no contact with her for a period of time to give me the chance to get through to her. And it's a very dramatic story about them being in there and her having to continuously fight with the Kellers, not to intrude, because if Helen knows that they're available, she's going to slip back into her worst behavior. And so Annie, in her stubborn way, holds the line, a lot of drama going on, and finally Helen begins to talk. And this is the first time she's talked since she was an infant, since she had her very first words as a little baby. And she's able to not only talk, but also to begin to do sign language. And so she begins to become functional. And this is the beginning of the turnaround. So this is an incredibly inspiring story. And the thing to get about this is that the story called The Miracle Worker, you tend to think that's talking about Helen Keller, who became this incredibly inspiring speaker and a real philosopher, and has all of these wonderful, wonderful quotes. And I'm going to share some with you because they're so relevant to what I was just saying, is that we have the quote that says, "Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved." Wonderful, wonderful, and very valid quote. The other one that she has is very similar to that, is the one that says, "I thank God for my handicaps, because through them I found myself, my work, and my God." Okay. These are very, very powerful thoughts. This woman would have never had these thoughts or said them to anybody had she grown up the other way. And so we look at what's happened here. There's not just that Helen Keller went through great adversity, but that her family went through great adversity, and that, most importantly, that Annie Sullivan went through great adversity. That pushed Annie Sullivan to be what she was and to create the changes that she did. So the miracle worker is actually Annie Sullivan in this story. Now, what we're looking at here is that in each of these cases, these young women, had they had much more mild, much more supportive, much more nurturing, much more privileged kind of circumstances, they would not have become nearly the people that they became. And so it's not to say, hey, suffer some more, it'll make you a better person, but it's to say, we've got to embrace both the gifts we're given, which is these are two very bright women, and as much as the Kellers were kind of a screwed up family, they cared about their daughter and they invested in her. Okay, so there are those gifts in this, but it's so important to get the power of these wounds as well to understand how we work. And so in my role as a psychologist, I have to see this in people. I have to help people to see it for themselves. Is the worst thing you can have in life is no suffering and adversity. That, in fact, that is the thing that makes us, that drives us to be of substance. However, what we know is that sometimes the adversity is too great for people and they simply become perpetually wounded. Okay, that the wounds of that early life stay with them, and people struggle with low self-esteem, with paranoia, with anxiety, with hypersensitivity, with lethargy and hopelessness. And so that is also a possibility. And so when I think about our life courses, this whole thing about optimizing your life purpose is, as we go into life, those things that happen to us, particularly in our developmental years, we can go down many different roads with this. And some of those roads become very, very dark. Those roads where I allow my gifts to sort of spoil me and make me lazy and unappreciative, or my wounds to make me perpetually wounded and reactive in my life and never really grow beyond them. All the way to the person who truly resolves their wounds and optimizes their potential and becomes extraordinary. And so I think about people like Helen Keller as being a real model of this. But when we think about ourselves, when you look for purpose, look at those things, okay? There's a reason why I'm a psychologist, okay? Because there were wounds of my early life within my own family that made me become much more preoccupied. I've shared the joke with many folks that growing up in Southeast Huntsville, where everybody was an engineer, figured I was going to be an engineer. I'm good at math. I like doing problem solving. It was only later that when I got to college, I realized how cool being a people engineer was, and so I went to that instead. But it was, in fact, the wounds of my early life that made me so preoccupied and interested in that. And so to realize that it is the adversity of life that has value, but only if we make the very best use of it. Okay? And this is where psychotherapy comes in. Because one of the quotes I've got in there that I didn't bring in here is one that simply says, adversity creates wounds and strengths. Good psychotherapy heals wounds and refines strengths. And that's really what we're looking for. And when we do that, then not only do I feel better and I'm not anxious and depressed, I also really find my place in the world. And in finding my place in the world, everything else comes into place as well. Life has meaning born out of resolution of these issues. Now, if you would look below, please, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can look for a lot more of these kind of things coming to you.